Guys, please welcome Taylor Roa into the BC Zoom Room podcast. Taylor, how are you?
I'm doing good, Drew. Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, man. Another week closed.
So Taylor, I can't do a great job of introing you to the audience. So could you give our students just a quick 1 minute, intro on yourself? Tell us who you are, kind of what you're doing, where you're from.
Yeah, sure thing. So I am the manager of talent acquisition at Wistia. It's a video tech company based in Cambridge. And I'm a career recruiter. I started my career out in staffing about 5 years ago, which is a pretty intense sales career if folks out there haven't heard of it before. It's essentially sales, but your product and your livelihood is based on people, and people are unpredictable. So it's definitely a tough business, but recruiting in-house is incredible. And so that was my goal, to make that move into recruiting in-house for startups. Before Wistia, I was at Flywire, and before that I was at a staffing startup called The Sorcery.
And so, why I'm excited to have Taylor on today is, he has a great, in the recruiting world, he sees a lot of people. He interacts with both students and executives in his firm and multiple firms around. He has a great perspective. So, today this conversation is going to be centered around how to see yourself as a startup, especially in the early career development, especially for, young students at BC. So could you kind of walk us through kind of in your belief or in your view, the 3 early career tips that you have for students?
There's 3 general bits of advice that I brought to this conversation today. The first one is maybe contrary to your parents' advice, and that is move often early in your career. You should really see your contribution to the companies you're working for and base that around problem solving. So if you think about it that way, early in your career, the problems you're solving are going to be much smaller, and they're going to take less time to solve. And so in your first year or 2 years at a new job, when you're starting out, the problems you solve will add up quickly. Before you know it, there's not much growth left to be had. And at that point, when you're not challenged, you're not growing, you should think about moving on. As you advance in your career, naturally, the problems you're solving are bigger. And so you'll have a longer tenure at the companies that you're part of. But a lot of people are kind of afraid of making a move because they don't want to seem jumpy. And the reality is, folks who move around in the first 5 years of your career, by the end of your career, you'll be making 50 to 100% more in salary because of the value that you've gained and the experience that compounded in those first few years. Another tip I have is a little bit more practical. For every application that you submit, you should be messaging at least 3 people on that team. And I'm not talking about the recruiter. The recruiter in that company is getting flooded with messages, but say you're a data engineer and you want a data engineer role, go on LinkedIn and search around for data engineers at that company and just send a simple message saying, hey, I saw that there's a role posted on your team. Curious to get your thoughts on what it's like to have been working there and any advice you have for somebody like me early in my career. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to help you out and talk about their experience. But also, a lot of companies have a referral bonus program, and you can leverage that to help get you in front of an interview. If you message somebody and make a connection, they might actually have a cash incentive to put you in front of the recruiter and get you that interview, rather than just submitting your application and hoping that you'll be seen. The last one, and actually, if you don't mind, I'll throw a bonus one in after this, but the last big one for me, and I know it's a cliche, but pick up a book. It's really not hard to be better than average. And if you want better than average pay or better than average opportunity in your career, you have to be better than average. And it's not hard to do. You just have to pick up a book, man. Knowledge compounds. Most people don't spend their free time learning and advancing themselves. That's really as simple as it gets. You're not going to feel it tomorrow if you picked up a book yesterday, but over the course of a year, 2 years, the knowledge that you're gaining can be applied to any interview you have, any conversation that you have, or any problem that you're facing in your current role. So please, if you're not reading, you're doing yourself a huge disservice.
I love that. So before we get your bonus point, I think we got to stop right there. The saying is what?
Sure.
Leaders are readers, right?
Leaders are readers. It's so true.
Tried and true. So what's that 4th piece?
Another practical one. Do a self-SWOT analysis before every interview. There's no better way to understand what's ahead of you and maybe what threats you're facing that you can overcome, but also your strengths and your weaknesses. These are things that you're going to use to tell your story and to communicate what's relevant to you about this position. But remember, you're a startup in this day and age, in this current modern talent market. Things are moving, and you have to see yourself as your own unique brand. So you should be doing self-SWOT analysis and maybe even a lean canvas if you've read Lean Startup, to put yourself in the best position.
Awesome. So I guess let's backtrack a little bit. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the modern job market and kind of what it means to see yourself as an entrepreneur as a personal brand or an entrepreneur?
Yeah, totally. So I talk about how, for millennials and Gen Z, we're really the first generations potentially where our parents and our grandparents' career advice just doesn't apply. So much has changed so quickly in the past 5 to 10 years even. People today are working in jobs that didn't even exist 3 or 4 years ago. And so it can be hard for folks to navigate their early career, especially just based on some outdated advice that hasn't changed. And so really I think the key part of it is, one, how we look at security, because security used to be tenure and it used to be a pension. And so people would gauge success in their career based on longevity with a company. And that's just completely turned upside down. Today, security is about having options. And so by moving around, broadening your range of experience and your range of knowledge, what you're doing is you're giving yourself more options, because you don't know what opportunities will exist 5 years from now that don't exist today. But by opening yourself up to more options in your career, you're increasing your probability for success. So that's why I talk about moving early and broadening your range of experience. I think that's the real case for seeing yourself as a startup right now, obsessing over your personal brand and the story that you're telling.
Love that. And I'll just add to that, when you say security means options, I kind of see it as the modern day philosophy of a career. And it's a journey. There's no really predestined path anymore. So it's not you go to school, you do X for 2 years, you return back to B school, and then you're in the world and you're on that path. It's more of a windy, crossy road where you have a toolbox. And when you start out, you might just have a hammer in that toolbox. And you take that first job and that's in the finance position and you develop a skill. And now you've added that skill or that next tool into the toolbox. So now I have a hammer and a screwdriver. And along that journey, that path you're on, that career journey, I call it, you are just adding tools to the toolbox so that when you do get to that point where you start to slow down and get into a specific role, you have a multidisciplined approach to solve problems in the 21st century.
Totally.
Could you add on to that at all?
Yeah, totally. And also I'd say there's only so much we can plan for. I talked to a student the other day about the fact that they wanted to be a product manager out of college. And they were asking me what the best path for them to take would be into product management. And the answer is you can't become a product manager in the classroom. There's really no company that's going to hire you as a product manager right out of college, because it's kind of an elusive role and it often means something a little bit different in every company. So the path can look like anything really. You can come from a customer success role where you're becoming a real expert on the product and its limitations, its ability, and how it interfaces with customers. That's a reasonable path into a product manager role. Or if you're more technical, you can grow into product management from engineering, or you can go from project management into product management. So it's really about being curious and exploring those options and keeping your eye on the prize, but being open to different opportunities that can get you there, because career paths are more ambiguous and changing more often than they ever have before.
I agree. And I think I read a quote from Peter Thiel, and I heard it from someone, but it's, and this is more based on entrepreneurship, but I think it both applies to the career as well. But it's really, when you're starting a business, it's someone who's a successful entrepreneur is someone who is experiencing that real world problem and they have that unique skill set, or they have that unique toolbox that qualifies them to solve that problem. So it might not be that you're able to, do the exact job you want to do or start the exact business you want to start in your first few years out, but that doesn't mean you aren't qualified. That just means you have to continue crafting and adding to the toolbox.
Yeah, totally. I love the way he talks about that. And he says, to start a company is a stupid goal, really. If you arrive to that goal by discovering a problem and having a real true passion about solving that problem, then that's the reason maybe to go into business and start a company. But so many people out of college, especially in entrepreneurship programs, there's a lot of passion there and a lot of ideas and creativity, but you're not yet really uniquely qualified to solve any problem. And that won't come until you've built whatever experience you build in the next 5 to 10 years. If you can exceed as an entrepreneur in your career, and you can really see yourself as a startup and build a name for yourself and experience behind you, you can define what success looks like after that. And that might be starting a company for you. But you're 40 times, I think, more likely, something like that, if you start a company after age 40 than you are if you start it after age 20.
That's awesome. We'll have to get the stats behind that.
Yeah, check me on that. It's something like that.
We'll have to pull it. So great. I'm a young, 21-year-old entering this job market. Jobs might be a lot different that I'm looking for now. Where do I start looking for opportunity, and what principles should I follow if I do find that opportunity?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing that recent grads and young professionals have to understand is that compensation takes many different forms. We often think of it in terms of salary and benefits, but depending on your goals and what's important to you, compensation could be the experience you're gaining, because that experience can be currency to you. It can be traded in the future and hold you at a higher value because of what you've learned. And also time and lifestyle. Certain roles will give you more flexibility, and depending on what you want out of life, or maybe some side projects you're working on, that can be more valuable than money. So those are 3 things that you'll want to weigh with every opportunity that you face, especially early in your career. But I often always discourage young people to not just accept the highest paying role. It's often the time where we're most strapped for money. We're just starting to pay down our student debt, so it can be really enticing to take the highest paying role. But often that's not always the most challenging and interesting role. And I think we had talked about before in a previous conversation, really, in my opinion, all it takes to succeed is to genuinely have an interest in what you're doing, because you'll have some intrinsic motivators to go out and really find a solution, to really do something differently. Whereas if you're not really passionate about something, you're just doing it for the paycheck, you're not going to stand out. And if you do, it's going to be really hard and kind of deflating to make that happen. So another cliche, follow your passion, or money follows passion, but it's also true. And I think logically, when you're hiring somebody, would you prefer to hire somebody, Drew, with 2 more years of experience who's not really interested in what they're doing, or somebody who's a little bit more junior but totally genuinely passionate about the job?
I want the passion,
Exactly.
Because the passion means they're going to hustle.
Exactly.
And they're going to think about something that I couldn't even imagine, but they're going to see it in a different way than I do, and they're going to want to do it just because they love to do that more than anything else.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's logical, really, but money will follow passion. Really try and explore those interests in college and in your early career, but take the more interesting role, even if it pays less.
So dive deeper into that, because that kind of really goes against the traditional way of thinking. Why is a job that might pay me a little bit less, why is that usually the more intriguing job, or the more creative job, in your opinion? And you had stated that that's what you think.
Yeah. So, I mean, early in your career, it's
early
definitely
career.
more often to be true, because higher paying jobs are often the larger companies, and you'll come into a role on a massive team where it's harder to stand out. You have less scope of responsibility, and you'll often have a very rigid template to stick to and how to get your job done. Whereas often the more interesting, more challenging roles are on smaller teams. They're a little bit less mature and established. And so that requires you to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, step outside of your comfort zone. But often a smaller team won't always have the highest price tag on the role that you're hiring for. It's not always true, especially in tech. Sometimes that can be turned upside down, and you're lucky to find something like that. But I also want folks to not see this totally binary when I offer that advice, because there is value in your first job being at a large company with a really entrenched, established training program. When you do go to that more creative, more flexible startup after a large job like that, a large company, you'll bring more value just having that experience. So I'm not telling folks to avoid those jobs at all. I'm just saying, don't default to the highest paying job. You should weigh all these different forms of compensation, from lifestyle to what you'll be learning and actually experiencing in the role, and also to compensation and benefits. But it's often a mistake to just pick the highest offer and just go forward with that.
No, thank you for clarifying that, because I think what you struggle to see is, it's not you saying necessarily join that startup because it's going to give you that creative experience, but also you're not saying go to that, large corporate conglomerate either. It's kind of finding that sweet spot for you and recognizing what you want in your career. Could you tell us a little bit more? Wistia seems to have a unique culture. Could you kind of tell us about culture, what it means to you, and also what it means to Wistia?
Yeah, so you'll hear from a lot of like titans in all kinds of industries about the importance of people and culture. And if you think about it, all a company is a group of people, right? And the way that those people get things done depends on the culture. So look at it this way: if you're going to buy a new laptop, you'll want some really great hardware and features, but if the operating system is crap, then it's not going to work out well for you, right? And so in many ways, the company's culture is its operating system. It's how we communicate and share information. In some companies, it's not very fluid, and information doesn't travel transparently. And those companies often struggle to mitigate risk or to identify opportunities to innovate. And so that's why in the business world, culture has become, at least in tech, a huge point of focus and investment. But I often find that the companies that do it best do it much more naturally. So business is becoming more human, and Wistia's mission is to help make business more human through video. But I think our culture happens pretty naturally just from the values of our team. We're definitely a people-first company, but we value creativity and teamwork more than anything. And that's really part of the experience at Wistia on any team.
And then I think the most important thing when it comes to culture, because I've been a part of teams, and when you're a part of teams, both athletically and business, you can feel it right away if the culture is right or if it's wrong. And if it's wrong, it's usually being faked. You can't fake culture. And you said that you can't. It's natural. It just comes. It's what it is. And it starts at the top and it flows down.
Yeah, totally. And also, we're only as good as the context around us. And so, I could be super smart and capable, but if I come into a deadlock, toxic environment, I'm just not going to be half as productive as I could be. I'm not going to be anywhere near my potential. So, and I think that actually segues pretty well into our next point.
So I look at the Googles, the Amazons of the world. Engineering is huge. Programmers are huge. And I don't have that skill set. I'm not going to be able to make a career out of that. And so I see it's the 10X engineer, software developer that's getting this huge payday. Mm-hmm. And I can't realistically do that. Does that mean I'm a failure in the professional setting nowadays, or is there other ways that I can look at it?
Yeah, no way. There's so many different ways to succeed now. And like I said already, business is becoming more and more human. And especially because a lot of the analytical, technical things that we can do as human beings those are the first things that can be automated. And so even you look at the cybersecurity field, that was a really hot major in universities 5-7 years ago. but a lot of cybersecurity activities are now being automated. And so there's less demand for as large of a cybersecurity team at a huge company that you might have needed before. That doesn't mean that the career field's extinct, but it's just an example of the importance of soft skills right now in the business world. And we talk a lot about the technical 10x contributor, somebody who can do 10 times more output on an engineering team, for example, like you mentioned. And companies will pay a ton of money to compensate that. But I think something that's not talked about enough, and something that I certainly value, is a different kind of 10x contributor. Somebody who can come in and elevate their team. If you're somebody who can come in with a positive attitude, curiosity, and really be a team player that elevates 10 people on your team just a little bit, that to me is another kind of 10x contributor. If you can succeed at that, you're more likely to be fast-tracked for leadership roles, and you're more likely to grow more quickly yourself too. And that may be the form of compensation you receive instead of like 10x pay, like some engineers do in the Netflixes of the world. But there's also an element to some overperformers that can drag the team down and create some cultural imbalance on the team. And to me, sometimes that takes away from that value of a 10Xer. If they're arrogant and they want all the credit, that's a real issue on some teams. So I think it's much better to come in with the right attitude, to really be intentional about elevating the team and leading by example. I think we'll see that being valued more and more in this world that's becoming more human.
Love it. So before we get out here, do you want to just wind down, wrap up any leaving advice or guidance for students, especially being in a talent acquisition role, and maybe give them a little insights on what Wistia can do, and if they may be interested in Wistia at all?
Yeah, so Wistia is a super exciting team. It's the most creative team I've ever been on, and so it's a lot of fun, but we're solving some pretty cool, interesting challenges in marketing, and we're really working toward the future of marketing. And so if that's something that's exciting to you, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn anytime. I'm happy to connect and browse our career pages. But also just some general advice to folks. Again, I'd echo, keep an open mind and keep your options open. Don't tell yourself no and close any doors, but the more networking you do, the more questions you ask, the more curious you are, the more books you read, all of that compounds and results in more opportunity for you. So be vulnerable, be curious, especially in this time. Right now, we're not really sure what the future will look like, but I know that we'll get through this as, a country or a world, and there's going to be more opportunity out there. It just might look a little bit different. So.
Wonderful. Taylor, really appreciate you coming on, and look forward to having some students reach out to you in the near future.
Thanks, Drew. It's been fun.
Be well.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.